Hello, I'm Deniz Cemiloglu. I'm a PhD candidate at Bournemouth University, and today I will present to you our position paper on explainable persuasion for more informed play. I have worked on this paper with my supervisor, Raian Ali, and with Maris Katiana, who is Kindred's head of responsible gambling and research. The content of the presentation will consist of three main headings. First, I will give you an overview of the context. Then I will explain what we mean by explainable persuasion. We will go over the components of the explanation, why it is needed, the design approach that could be taken, and also the challenges that we can face when we're designing explainable persuasion. And I will conclude the presentation with our plans for future work. Today, many online gambling platforms are equipped with persuasive techniques to increase player engagement and enhance the overall player experience. Here we see two different examples. In the first example, the demo games encourage players to try out new games. These could be the new players or existing players. And in the in-reward game example, we can see that the players are encouraged to gamble more by the appeal of bonuses or free spins. Persuasive interfaces are designed to create cognitive or emotional change in the mental state of the user to persuade them to certain action or to gather their attention to certain content. And this persuasion could be self-directed. In this case, the users use the persuasive technology to reach a goal. Here's an example of the Nike challenge where the users motivate themselves to be more active by competing with their friends. This persuasion could also be to persuade others. So in the example that we gave before, the in-game rewards are persuasive elements that motivate players to gamble more by the appeal of bonuses. Whether self-directed or to influence others, persuasive interfaces which are designed to change the mental state of the user may raise ethical concerns. This is because while designers create persuasive technology with certain intentions, unintended consequences may occur when the users interact with these persuasive interfaces. In the context of gambling, persuasive interfaces designed for player experience may also facilitate problem gambling. Here we see an example of the negative impact of a persuasive technique which seems to contribute to a disastrous outcome for the player. Persuasive interfaces may facilitate problem gambling because these techniques may trigger mechanisms related to addictive behavior. These mechanisms could be behavioral, cognitive, psychosocial, or psychological. And players may be unaware of being influenced, and this can hinder their ability to reflect on the behavior. Here's an example of a persuasive technique and how it might relate to problem gambling. So autospin is an example of persuasive technique reduction, which is reducing effort for the user to take an action. So reducing the steps needed to gamble may in certain cases worsen an individual's ability to override their impulses, or it may speed up the decision-making process, making it hard for individuals to reflect on their behavior and also make them more prone to cognitive biases such as gambler fallacy. And players may be unaware of these potential effects when they're interacting with the persuasive technique. Today, gambling operators are requested to help consumers make informed choice about their play. So the industry needs a solution to respond to transparency and user choice needs in the design of persuasive interfaces. Our proposed solution is to address transparency and user choice needs in persuasive systems by taking the informed consent theory defined in bioethics literature as a reference model. Informed consent is defined as a process for getting permission before conducting a healthcare intervention on a person. So the subject needs to understand the intent, the nature, and the possible outcomes linked with the intervention before accepting to receive it. From a closer look, we can see that within the bioethics setting, a medical expert with an intention applies medical treatment to change the condition of the patient. The outcome could be the one that's intended, so that's to treat the patient, but it could also be an unintended outcome, which could be the side effects of the treatment that's been applied. When we look at the persuasive system setting, we see that a designer with an intention creates persuasive system which changes the mental state of the user. Again, the outcome could be intended, but there is the possibility of unintended outcomes. Here we see that persuasive interfaces mimics an intervention similar to the intervention within the medical domain. So we believe informed consent theory can be a reference to also foster informed choice within persuasive system settings. Accordingly, we suggest that persuasive gambling interfaces can fulfill conditions for informed play by explaining players, the persuasion intention, the persuasion techniques used by the system, and also the potential consequences so the players can consent to being subject to it. Actually, the practice of transparent persuasion is not new. We can see its examples within the marketing and advertising domain. In the first example, the product placement disclaimer is used to inform viewers that the show contains advertisements. In this case, we see an advertisement of Coca-Cola within the TV show Friends. In the second example, sponsored post disclaimer is used on social media to inform followers that the influencer got paid to advertise the product. So the followers know that they're interacting with advertisements. Similarly, we suggest that persuasive techniques could also be transparent within these interfaces. With an analogy to explainable AI, we coined the term explainable persuasion. Explainable AI explains why and how a system behaved in a way so that the person can have an informed choice when using it. By explainable AI, the user can decide to use the system, decide whether they will trust the system, or even they can file legal cases against them in case the error occurs. We would like to take the concept of explainable AI a step further and not only explain AI, but also explain the psychological foundation that persuasive interfaces are based on, and also how these interfaces can change the mental state of the person. We know this is an ambitious goal, and we're taking a first step toward the goal by coining that concept explainable persuasion. So, what we mean by explainable persuasion is the system's transparency about its persuasion attempts so that users can choose to be conscious of how the design may alter their attention or behavior towards certain content or action, and they can thus consent to being subject to it. Here's just an example to give you an idea how the explanation could look like within the interface. So maybe it can have a similar look like the cookie disclaimers, where individuals can learn more about them by pressing learn more. But this is just to give you an idea, and I should note that we're at our initial stages of investigating explainable persuasion. So in the design of explainable persuasion, we need to answer some initial questions. Our first question is, what could be the components of explainable persuasion? To define the content of explainable persuasion, we suggest that the persuasion knowledge model could be used as a reference. This model is used within consumer research, and it's used to define components of persuasion knowledge. So according to this model, when consumers have information about the persuasion agent, which is when the consumers know the intentions, the tactics, and the psychological mediators of the persuader, and when they have information or relate to information about themselves, so when they relate to their own coping goals and coping tactics, they are more likely to stay in control of their behavior in the face of a persuasion attempt. So to simplify this model, here's an example. When a person comes across such an ad like this, they usually are aware of the intention that this advertisement is there to sell products by the use of celebrity and through appealing to admiration. And when a consumer comes across an ad like this and is feeling like this could be something that they want to buy, they can also relate to themselves and say, well, I need to stay in budget this month. I already have 3 shampoos in my bathroom. And they can also relate to their coping tactics and contest to how the celebrity looks and say, well, it's not the shampoo, it's the hairdresser that's making the magic. So this model can act as a reference to argue what components we would need in persuasion explanations within persuasive interfaces. Here we will exemplify a persuasion explanation through the persuasion knowledge model with the example of the autospin that we mentioned before. The components of our explanation can consist of information relating to the persuasion agent. So we can inform the users, the players about the use and say, this website uses persuasive design technique autospin. We can inform them about the intent and say autospin is used to have continuous interaction and increase player engagement. We can inform users about the tactic and say autospin persuades players to have continuous interaction by reducing the effort to gamble. We can tell users why this technique is persuasive and say reducing effort to take action is persuasive because people are naturally wired to choose the path of least effort. And we can also have information about the potential impact on problem gambling and state that reducing steps to gamble in certain cases may make it difficult to resist impulses and speed up the decision making process, making it hard to reflect on behavior. We can also have information relating to the persuasion agent so we can remind the players about their coping goal and say gambling is best enjoyed when you have control over your gambling time and amount. And we can also inform them about coping tactics with the persuasive techniques and say to minimize the negative impact of autospin, you can disable the function or limit the time you play with it. Another question that needs to be answered is why is explainable persuasion needed? We believe it is needed because, from a moral perspective, explainable persuasion can help designers take responsibility in protecting players' rights to know that they're being exposed to persuasion. Such an approach is in line with GDPR, which argues for the right to an explanation of an algorithmic decision that was made about the user. And we can see a similar guidelines proposed by the Federal Trade Commission, which state that native advertisements, in this case sponsored advertisements within social media or websites, should be labeled sponsored content to help users know that they're interacting with advertisements. So from a moral perspective, it will help protecting players' right to know that they're exposed to persuasion. From a business perspective, explainability is important because it's a building block of a trusting relationship between the player and the system and the operator, and it can increase user satisfaction. And explainable persuasion can work as a proactive strategy and help players reflect on their behavior before they have to take extreme measures such as self-exclusion. In designing explainable persuasion, we need to answer certain questions in different design stages of explainable persuasion. So in the exploration stage, we need to answer what needs to be explained. So we looked at the model and we saw that it's quite a crowded model with lots of components. So what do we explain to the users? Do we explain the use, the intention, the tactic, or even how to cope with it? Or do we explain how long the intervention was tested to know if it's leading to the intended behavior or whether the intervention was tested for side effects? In the creation stage, we can ask what level information should be given. Different players may have different needs with respect to information, so how should we design these? Where should these explanations be delivered, and where should the users see these explanations? For example, maybe these explanations could be adaptive, such a case that when a person is having problematic behavior due to interacting with, let's say, autospin, an explanation pops up saying that this could be an issue. And another question is how should we present explanations? For example, if we want to explain the impact of emotion, how can we explain emotional change to the user? Maybe the use of emotional detection recognition could be a way. And in the evaluation stage, we need to ask ourselves, how should we test to see whether explainable persuasion is valid enough to foster informed consent? Designing explainable persuasion can be challenging for several reasons. First of all, disclosing persuasion attempts made by the system may decrease the efficiency of such techniques. Disclosing too much information about persuasion mechanics may lead to information overload and frustrate users, or it may distract users and create risk for them. Users may simply ignore these explanations, or they may lose interest over time. And also, explanations may become persuasive elements themselves, so they can gather player attention to interacting with them. Overall, these challenges need to be addressed when designing for explainable persuasive interfaces. But the most significant challenge would be designing explainable persuasion usable and contextual enough not to impair user experience, but disruptive enough to catch user attention and foster critical thinking. Our future work will focus on identifying user requirements related to explainable persuasion, and analyzing trade-offs between explanation and other design qualities such as user experience. And we would like to examine what constitutes an informed consent regarding the use of persuasive techniques. So, is it enough just to inform players that persuasive techniques are used within the website, or do players actively need to want to be a part of it, want to be subject to these interventions? Thanks a lot for listening. This work has been partly supported by Kindred Group, Division of Responsible Gambling and Research, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.